Hello everyone and welcome to another video, and today we finally talk about the new kid on the block. That being Age of Sigmar 4th edition, and the gem-packed new box set it starts with. So, the time has come, finally, and the 4th edition of Age of Sigmar is upon us. With the pre-order going on this Saturday, so it is time to think about the new schemes and plans for the new game. For me it is really exciting because I have never been into the AOS, and the whole shake-up of the rules and indexes is a great time to get into the game. I thought about different armies I would like to collect and play, and the main force I am working on right now, behind the scenes, sort of, is the new Cities of Sigmar, focusing mostly on the new human minis. But since the main box is Stormcast vs Skaven, and I am definitely getting that box, I wanted to come up with the scheme for the SCE half. Now, I do mostly stick to some in-lore based color scheme. But for this force, I wanted to do something more custom and personal. Most of the armies I have now is quite dark, so I have decided to come up with an easy white armor recipe that would be easy to replicate and fast to paint. White, same as black, is a somewhat annoying color to paint. You can just do white primer and call it a day, but the mini will look kind of flat. On the other hand, white is a terrible color to do with a brush. So on this one I am relying heavily on the airbrush, but only for the armor. You can do it with the brush, but it will take more time and probably won't look as good. What I have here are the minis from the Warcry starter set that came out a few months ago, plus I have one of the old Liberators that has been just lying around in my box. So, the 4 minis should be a nice sample for the paint scheme, if it works or not on the single minis, as well as in the sum volume of minis. And I do apologize in advance if I'm jumping around from mini to mini, but I wanted to use the best footage I had. But all of them were painted the same afternoon, and it took about 3 to 4 hours to finish them up, which is quite decent. I started with quite a heavy Zenithal Prime to leave just the deepest shadows black. Over the white primer, I used Arctic Blue from Scale 75 through the airbrush to give the armor cold bluish look, but still having the impression of white surface that just reflects the environment. That makes it look much more realistic, but also the next step that just defines the plates. We are talking about black lining, and the best tool you have for it is an oil wash. You can use acrylic, but it is way too messy, and with the terrible coverage of white paints, you just can't make any mistake. With oils you can, and you can be much less careful, and just apply the thin down paint into the recess, and the paint will flow right through it. And if you make any mistake, you can just fix it quickly with a sponge and a little bit of medium. And basically that is the armor for now. I wanted to leave myself room if I did not like the scheme, but spoiler warning, I did like the scheme, so I left it like this. But now it's time to actually color block the different parts of the mini. This is an important step because you can see if the colors work together or if there is still something missing. I have the cold bluish part of the armor, so I wanted to introduce a prominent warm secondary color. I used purple again, from Scale 75 as a base coat for the cloth, and hair on the Liberator, and shield on the Liberator. These minis, and it looks like the new ones as well, have a lot of fabric and capes around them. And I did not want to spend a lot of time painting texture on the fabric. So I cut a corner a little bit and highlighted the cloth with magenta using dry brush. And the same thing with Squid Pink from Vaiho, with very light hand. This way is super fast and easy to create a nice, super clear highlights as well as slightly textured finish on the cloth. Only downside is that you need a large working space on the model, and you need to be careful not to get any paint on the armor because it will just shine through the white. But it was actually easy and I really like the way it turned up. For the parts that are hard to reach, I just use the brush. And the same goes for the shield, as I said, the face and highlighting the edges of the shield. Now I know I do jump a little bit in the video because the whole paint scheme was still in planning throughout the process, and I did jump around the model even in real time. But the color blocking phase was just a simple mental process, but put on the model, and then waiting if it works or not. Fortunately, these models are not that busy, so the only parts worth blocking were the purple fabric, the base for non-metallic gold, the different belts and parchments, the weapon, and of course, in some cases, the faces. I used Prussian blue to base the weapons and very quickly dry brushed them with Arctic blue, and that was it for the weapons. I know it is not very visual right now, but these are just hammers. For the swords I will probably figure out something different. All the belts and parchments get a super fast treatment of gallium and flash, GW contrast paint. Same thing goes for the inner parts of the cloaks, and for all these parts it is highlighting with buff from Scale Color Artist. Basically, most of the painting time was spent on the non-metallic metal gold. But even in this case, the whole thing was really fast. This is really not a display level, but as a tabletop NMM it is sufficient, I would say. I started from the dark brown ochre as a base coat. This color is reddish warm brown, quite a nice base, and the shadow color for the NMM gold. From here I went in with brown ochre, then with Naples yellow, which is also a warmish variant of the yellow paints from the Scale Color Artist, and this was just to make a very fast sketch of the light and highlights on the different parts. This was the most time consuming step of all, but it is quite an easy step. It just takes time to block out all the highlights. I just followed the upper facing surfaces of all the different shapes and mapped where the light would be reflected the most. Now all of this is just my opinion, and I am certainly no expert, but in this case I actually do like the final result. And when it works for me, it sure works on the table. Also, for the very complicated shapes, like the textured shoulder plates, I did most of the work just with basic overbrush and let the texture pick up all the pigment. I continued with the primary yellow, also from Scale Color Artist, and then vanilla yellow all the way to off-white, just covering smaller and smaller parts of the shapes. Ultimately, going just for the edges and for the highest reflections. For this part I had two things to think about. Because of the very light character of the armor, I had to at least match the volume of the highlights on the metal, because it should be the highest highlight. But to make it somewhat believable, the highlight should be really contained and small. And the most important part of the gold should be the very high contrast between the shadow and the highlight on the non-metallic metal. This is the case with every NMM, but if you have very light primary color, you should really pay attention to this detail. So it is not a bad idea in the latter parts of the work to reintroduce back the shadow color to make it more prominent and have more contrast over the volumes. Now, army projects like these are always a great opportunity to learn something in the process. For me, this was a great mental exercise to figuring out the paint scheme of the army. But also I really like the finish of the white armor. on the models, especially in larger volumes, on the table. And that gets me really excited about Stormcast and about painting them and playing them on the table. I kinda hated the whole gold scheme of the army, and I got really excited when GW dropped it and went in with the silver and blue secondary color. But the most important lesson from the paint job was just the brushwork on the whole thing. The only airbrush part is the armor, but the rest is 100% different brush techniques. And even though most of it is just simple layering, I feel like the whole non-metallic gold part of the model was a great exercise for the brush work. And this is super important. Mostly because already I feel like the finish is better and better with every other mini I paint this way. I have already some more Stormcast on the way, so I guess I will be training a lot more in the future, but that is great. Army projects like this should be new and exciting to keep the steam and juices flowing, otherwise it just gets boring. And I would like to keep this army small but fully painted, at least to this, let's say, Tabletop Plus standard. Hopefully I can stay true to my plans, because the amount of work in progress armies on my shelves kinda keep getting bigger and bigger. So let's hope this won't end up as just another one of these. As I said before, the inner parts of the cloak gets the same treatment as the belts. So Gallium and Flash from GW with buff highlights. Only here I wanted a little texture on the somewhat smooth finish of the rest of the mini. So I did a lot of tiny lines over the cloak, imitating the fabric. It is the same case as the magenta color of the cloaks. The texture just breaks the otherwise somewhat smooth finish of the mini. And that is basically the job done for the most parts. I took my time to step back and did some highlight work on the armor with pure white, but that was just for my pleasure. The only thing missing are the faces and bases. And here you can see just how jumpy the whole process was, because I actually did everything else before the faces, even the bases. But it is just because I had no idea what to do with it, because these are still kinda small from a miniature standpoint, and I do not want to spend a lot of time on them with the bigger army planning in picture. But that certainly does not mean just doing nothing. It just means cutting some corners with contrasts to get the faces to my, let's say, Tabletop Plus level. I ended up just mixing and matching Gallimian's Flesh, Orc Skin and Plasma Red from Wild Express color, and washed the face all over in these contrast paints. Just a quick highlight with a light skin tone and a bright dot in the eye, that is it. Good thing is that you can justify just the bright dot in the eye. It's just a lighting that is part of their lore. That also saves a lot of time and work. Trust me, there's nothing worse than painting 50 eyes on the army. This army has mostly helmeted soldiers, and I did not want to spend a lot of time on the faces, and this is actually a very nice and fast way to approach this topic. And the same mindset went into the bases. I did not want to think about some elaborate BS work on the bases, so I got some 3D printed. Focusing primarily to match the scenic bases I already had for my Warcry models. So something like an abandoned temple. Most of the paint scheme is pretty cold, so I wanted some contrast in the base. Also, I'm missing basically the whole green part of the spectrum. So I took the textured base that matched the ones from the Warcry warband, did a very heavy dry brush with buff, washed the base in brown contrast paint to get the recesses, and then dry brushed again with buff and off-white from Scale Color Artist. This time with the off-white a lot less aggressively than before. I used some dark green for the ground parts of these bases, but also an olive green for the rim of the base, which kinda introduce the green part of the spectrum to the model as a whole. I also added some dry tufts to give more of the abandoned temple kind of feeling. And the last thing that ties it all together is a dry pigment from scale 75, called simply Sand. I slammed it all over the base and also on the feet and capes of the models. And with that the paint job is finally done. And here are the final results. As I said, this was really fast work and I was still figuring a lot of things out in the process. But it is really simple and straightforward. And I had so much fun with it. I hope I will enjoy it the same when the rest of the Stormcast arrives. And I guess when I get to play them on the battlefield. You can tell me what army you are most excited about in the upcoming edition down in the comments and what you will be playing. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like, share and subscribe to grow the channel. And I will see you on the next one. Bye.